Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us here at another Kitchen to Shelf webinar. Kitchen to Shelf is the educational arm of Next Level Brands and is a provider of online and in-person courses and workshops for CPG entrepreneurs at all stages of growth. Whether you're an early stage startup, a local growing business, or a regional powerhouse, Kitchen to Shelf can help you learn what you need to know to grow. I'm Steve Clear, founder of Next Level Brands, and with me, as always, is my life and business partner, Deborah Armstrong, ETC.
Hello, everyone. Hope you're all doing well.
That stands for educator, trainer, and coach, by the way. She's also the co-founder of Kitchen to Shelf. Today, we're going to be talking about the sales versus production time crunch. And this is something that's a good thing and a bad thing in your business. But if you're successful, you're going to hit it. Probably not once, but several times during your growth. And it basically has to do with the fact that in order to sell things, or when you get that big order, you actually have to produce it. So as things grow, these two come into conflict with each other. The reason that we're discussing this sort of all by itself out there is because it's a common problem. B, it's a problem that can really affect your growth very quickly. And what it comes down to is the fact that, there's materials, there's money, but time is the ultimate commodity. You can always make more money, but you can't make any more time. And so it becomes something that doesn't get a whole lot of attention paid to all the time, but in fact is really critical in the success of your business. So one of the first outlooks for this is to, from the top line, do stuff that is important and don't do unimportant stuff.
Easier said than done most of the time.
I know it sounds simplistic, but that's what it's all about. So how do we go about doing that, Deborah?
So one of the things I love is the 4 quadrants of time management. This was really created by Dwight Eisenhower. A lot of you might be familiar with it because Stephen Covey made it really well known. And what I love about this is it helps us focus on what we should be looking at. So there are 4 different quadrants here. So I'm going to use my trusty little thing here to show you. So the first thing we want to look at is the area that is not important but urgent. This area right here. So this is the area where you get emails, you have a phone ringing, you have someone stopping by and saying, hi, do you have a few seconds to chat? Most of the time, these are not important, but they're urgent. They're there, they're in front of your face. And this takes a lot of our time.
Too much time.
Yeah. The next one I would look at is over here, is the not urgent, not important. And this is the time wasters. We all know them, we all do them. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do any of them. In fact, there's a lot of evidence out there that says you need to have that mental break. So for me, playing a quick game of solitaire, for Steve, it's doing what?
Oh, eBay.
That costs us money though too. So you need to have some time in this. This is the downtime, but really you don't want to spend a lot of time in this one area. The next one, I'm going to kind of go kitty corner over here, which is the urgent and important. This is where you're putting out fires. And this is where a lot of people spend their management time and their critical business time, because this is what has to get done now. So it is finding ingredients at the last minute, right? It's all of a sudden, you know what? We ran out of this ingredient. I cannot continue producing until I get it. So I have to get in my car and drive somewhere to get that ingredient and get it back. Everything else gets put on hold.
Filling out all of those one-day shipping orders that you got in on the website.
Right. So those kind of things they're urgent and they're important. Some of them you can plan for, some of them you can't. And so we want to talk about that. It's like also filling orders on demand, right? If you don't have a system in place. So like Steve talked about. So this is where a lot of people spend so much of their time that they don't have time to spend over in here, which is the important and not urgent. And what I'm going to encourage you to do is spend more time in this area. If you're spending more time in this area down here, what happens is you're going to spend less time in the important but urgent. So this could be creating a production plan so you know how much production you're going to need over a time period. So that way you can schedule, and all of a sudden you're not trying to go in at midnight sometime and produce something because you really have a deadline the next day. It means having an inventory system in place that can allow you to know that you're going to have those ingredients, so you're not going to have to run out there and get them. We're going to go over some of these other ones when we get a little bit later on, but I want you to think about that, is where are you spending most of your time? And when the sales crunch and the production crunch happens, a lot of times it's because we haven't spent enough time in this area doing the planning. So all of a sudden you have all these sales, you go into a crunch, you didn't have a production plan, you didn't think ahead, you didn't go through that planning process. So that's where we want to actually spend our time, is in that area.
It's very productive to do anything that's going to help alleviate a crunch down the road.
So we're going to talk about what are the ways that you can kind of alleviate this time crunch. What can you do now? What do you have control over? Because we don't have control over a lot of the things. One of the things you can do is know your strengths, right? So what part of the business are you best to contribute to? What parts of the business are best for your family, your team, other people? And what is the first thing you want off your plate? So you want to think about this. This is kind of an area of, when you're moving forward, what do you want to outsource? What do you want to get rid of? What do you want to do? So if you know what your strengths are, you can better decide how you want to spend your time in that important.
If poring over Excel spreadsheets is not your thing, then maybe a bookkeeping person to help you out is one of the first places you want to go. If you're the advocate, the strong founder salesperson for your business, then maybe you want to spend the time there and begin to work with someone who can actually handle operations and production.
And as we go along, we're going to talk about kind of ways to eliminate this, and you want to know your strengths as we're going along and keep that in mind. So there are really 4 ways to kind of save time, create an extra person, which is to automate, systemize, delegate, and eliminate.
There'll be a quiz on this.
But think about this in your business. At your job, a lot of you are still doing this on the side because you're starting up in your job, and also even at your home. So I want you to take a step back. And when I talk about at your job, a lot of people are like, oh, why does this make a difference? If you have a job that takes mental energy, it drains that mental energy from you from going out and putting in the work somewhere else. So if you can automate, systemize, delegate, or eliminate something in your job, and it relieves that kind of mental pressure, it's going to free up that mental space for your business. And at your home, a lot of people, they kind of leave this out. They separate them. But if you can free up more time at home, that means the more time you're spending on production and doing stuff in sales, you can do the things at home that are important, like spend time with your family, your spouse, or your cats.
You might think that hiring a housekeeper is an extravagant thing that only rich people do. But if you can pay someone a certain amount of money to do something that you spend 10 hours a week doing and put that 10 hours into sales or production, it's well spent.
So we're going to look at those as we move along too. So what can you automate? So think about this. What can you automate in your business? Can you at home or, and your other job? Email responses. Do you have things that come back the same all the time? So have an automated email response system. It can be as big as ones where you get an email and there's softwares that do this, they'll automatically send out certain emails. It can be as simple as you have a little, not super simple, thing called text expander, where you put in 3 different key letters and it'll fill in the part of it. It can be copying and pasting from somewhere else. So think about what you can do on that. Scheduling.
Calendar. I can't live without it.
Yes. Can you do something with scheduling? Calendar. There are different ways that automatically people can go in and set up times. This is really good if you're trying to do, now I wouldn't say for a sales call, tell somebody, oh, get on my calendar. But if you've been going back and forth and it's somebody's like, you know what, I have a calendar program, maybe you could look at it and we can find a time. That'll be the easiest way to find a time. It's also scheduling routine things you need to do, time blocking on that part of it, which isn't automating, but scheduling is kind of, yeah.
Systematized. Yeah.
Social media.
Oh boy. So social media, you have all kinds of things you can use to help you out. You can, of course, you can hire some of it done out if you want. There's also a program called Hootsuite, which will coordinate in between your Instagram and your Facebook and whatever. And again, you can get really caught up in social media and spend an awful lot of time on just trying to put your stuff out there, no less reading the other stuff. And so it's one of the things that as much as you can automate so that you do one piece of content and that piece of content then gets distributed through all of your social media, that's a big help.
Same with inventory records. So if you have a way where there is something that's going to pop up and is going to tell you, you know what, you need to reorder this now. It can be something that is, you know, a software program that pops up, but it can also be as simple as you're using milk for your production, as you have, you know, a big sticky on there that says buy milk now. You don't have to think about it. It takes that off of your brain. It also helps basically eliminate that.
And automating doesn't necessarily always mean software either. So the example of ingredients, if you're using 5-gallon barrels of something, you have a 2-week lead time to reorder, then you put a big Day-Glow red sticker on the 5-gallon drum or pail rather that you pull, that you know at that point, based on your production forecast, you're going to have to reorder the day you break into that bucket.
Why don't you go into with production too?
So production, basically, again, this is where the time crunch really comes in, is you have to have lead times to get materials, as we just talked about. You also have time to actually produce materials and then, of course, box them up, get them ready for shipping, and everything expands exponentially. So if you have 2 orders to 3 orders, you get 4 orders, and then guess what? You end up getting in a store and there's 20 stores, you just all of a sudden 10x'd all of your production and everything that's with it. So you want to make sure you can automate production by putting things in process that allow you to do that. That means things like perhaps buying certain machinery or leasing certain machinery in order for you to be able to increase that production. That's very important. Also having, you know, again, proper forecasting and proper management of your production process. Or it can also be as simple as having meetings with your co-packer or co-manufacturer so they understand what's going on and you can fit better into their schedules.
And the last one in here is bill paying. You know, I think most of us do it now, but having that automated where things are paid automatically, this is one of the best things to take out of, you know, the that urgent and important when you find out that there's something that's not on auto pay and it's like, oh, have a thing here. I'm going to go back really quick too with email responses. There's also software programs that will work for you to bring things back up to your mailbox.
Yes.
So you don't have to remember that, did I hear back from that person? So Boomerang is one of them that you can use that goes into some of them. But there are software programs out there so you don't have to remember who do I need to get back in touch with, or other CRMs, customer relationship management tools.
Right, contractually or Salesforce or any of those will.
Streak's my new favorite.
Streak's the new favorite. Will remind you of those things. So what about systematize? Well, one of the things you can do, of course, is production routines, which is you get into a series of actions that you take and perhaps with people who are working with you, and you make that a routine. You need it to be routine because you need to be able to measure it, and you need to be able to understand how much production you're going to be able to do within a certain period of time. So doing that again systematically, and for instance, if you are producing at this point, perhaps you're producing to order or by inventory, you really want to be producing on a calendar, and then you want to forecast your inventory over the calendar. So that's either I'm going to produce on Tuesdays and Thursdays rather than, oh, I don't have enough orders and I'm going to wait to produce until Friday. That affects, of course, your raw material inventories. Again, we talked about systemizing it with a Day-Glow sticker, but of course you can also do it on a spreadsheet, which is probably a little better. Maybe do it both ways, is just to make sure that you have all materials on hand and sufficient materials on hand to be able to do the production that you're going to need to do.
I'm going to throw in here too is also systemizing if you need to, an inventory. So every end of the month, it's a system that you put together and do an inventory of all your items that are on hand.
Set up and tear down for events. You're doing farmers markets, you're doing harvest fairs, you're doing other types of events where you're doing sampling with the product. You can systemize this by basically taking a look at all the materials you need to have to go to these events, forecasting what you're going to go through, and then having boxes or buckets to be able to just simply pull out number 1 through 10, and even how they go in the van or your car, if you're still using the car, how they go in the car, so that you pull out the stuff you need as you need it. And again, it all goes back in the same way, so that when you, well, it actually goes in the reverse way, so that when you get back to your office or the plant or your warehouse or whatever, it goes back out in the manner, in basically how it goes in, 1 through 10, it's 10 through 1, so that it pulls out 1 through 10.
So the other thing to think about here, and on a lot of these, are checklists. When I was back in my early 20s, I managed retail, and we lived by checklists, and they became one of my favorite things after that, because it's a systematic, you go through everything, it makes you stop and to think. So especially for events, you want to have a checklist to make sure you have everything that you need, a checklist for time, a checklist, for how much time it's going to take, but it'll save you, again, going back to that urgent and important, being at, an event and realizing you don't have the little cups for tasting wine, which we saw someone there coming over and borrowing them from someone else because he'd run out of cups and he didn't have time to run to the store. Luckily, there was someone there he could borrow them from. So think about checklists for a lot of the things, going back even to your production routines, having a checklist for tear down, setup. A lot of you probably already have this, but a lot of people keep things in their mind. And if you keep it up here and it's a mental checklist, what happens when you have someone else come in? Or what happens on the days when you're just really tired and just aren't thinking?
So sales follow-ups are another thing, is, depending upon how you run your sales business, you can systematize those. But first of all, with software is one of the ways you can do it, so that in fact, if you have an inquiry that comes in through your website, once that entity is logged in, it will continue to send something out to them in response to that to see if they still have a level of interest. You can also do this type of thing on paper still if you need to. If you're calling out, you can basically put together a funnel system that says, each day I'm going to do 5 of these calls, and this is an A, this one's a B. You can put all that together and you know where you're going to be spending your time.
Again, I like Streak.
Okay, yeah.
It's my new favorite. And no, I'm not getting a kickback from them. I just found them, and it's free if you have Chrome, and if Google, it just blends in with Google email, so I love it. Again, social media. We talked about how you can automate using like Hootsuite and some of those other things, but you can also systemize. You can have dates that you are going to post. You can actually create a schedule once a month, so you know what you're going to be posting when. What it does is it takes that mental energy that we all run short of, and it lets you put it in a concentrated time. And then when that week comes and you're busy, again, going back to urgent and important, or urgent and not important, if you can do this when it's urgent, it's not important, you can go through and put it in there. It's going to save you a lot of headache, and again, keep you out of that urgent and important thing when you realize you haven't posted all week on social media, which I haven't this week.
See?
I know. I still need some of this. This is why I love doing this.
Let's talk about stuff that you can delegate. One of the things that takes some time is marketing collateral. So that's, brochures, little handouts, whatever it is that you might be using. And basically the same thing with market research is there are professionals who do this. There are people who are talented in graphics that you might be able to get to do it, or you hire a firm to do it. Market research, a little bit more expensive to hire a firm to do it, but there are some companies out there that will do store audits and other things that can help you with that.
So the other thing you can do, because you're probably not at the point where you're doing store audits, this is when my husband goes into his big corporate thing. You can also look at doing research on What are the markets that are out there? So you can use a lot of inexpensive things like Fiverr to have someone go out, or some other a virtual assistant to do some internet research for you that you need to have done. What are, especially if you're looking for packages, they could packaging. If you have someone, they can get all of the different, places that you can get packaging. Those things that can take you down the rabbit hole, right? That you start researching and all of a sudden it's 3 hours later and you realize you spent all this time on something, and really what you're looking for is a list of something.
If I can strongly disagree, a store audit doesn't necessarily mean I'm hiring Nielsen to go out and 5,000 stores. A store audit is going to all the different supermarkets in my area, walking into the category which I'm participating in or I want to participate in, and actually looking at the stuff that's there.
Yeah, I think that's important for the entrepreneur to do still. That's why some of it. I know. I'm sorry. So the other thing is bookkeeping. This is the one that most people take off their plate the first thing, and they hire someone to do this. First of all, most people that are kind of getting into this type of business aren't necessarily numbers people, and this is a numbers game. So you also want to make sure you're doing it correctly. And there's a lot of small things whenever you're buying inventory. There, cost of goods. There's all these little things you need to think of that a bookkeeper is going to think of. So that's one of the first things that people usually delegate, and by hiring somebody to do it for them.
Talk about delegating sales. That may scare you a little bit, but let's just say that you're a really killer chef and you've got a really good product line. But the truth of the matter is you're really not comfortable actually selling to people. Then that's one of the first things you should delegate to make your business a success. And you can do that through either hiring someone to work with you to do it, maybe a brand advocate. You can also do it through independent sales reps or brokers, but it's one of the things you can delegate out. Yeah. Routine production. Okay. So if you are maybe not up to the co-packer level or co-manufacturer level, which would be your delegation ultimately of your production, then you can train people to actually do routine production for you on your line or wherever you're set up in your commercial kitchen or whatever, and you can teach them that you don't have to be at every single session. It doesn't mean you don't want to QC every batch that comes out, but you don't have to be there. It's one of the things, again, if it's just the same flavors, the same going into the same jars and same boxes, that's something that can definitely be delegated, and you can be doing more important things.
It's one of the things that comes back to is thinking of the value of your time. If you can hire someone for, if you're in California, the least you can do it for is $15 an hour to do something. And during that time, you can be on the phone doing a sales call with somebody, which is more valuable. So that's where that production part comes in. You want to think about what your opportunity cost. Your opportunity cost of you putting a label onto a jar, or you being on the phone with talking to a buyer. And the last things are chores at home. Again, as Steve said earlier, a lot of people like housekeeper, like, oh, it's extravagance. Not necessarily. If you think about what you need to do and where your time is, again, it's opportunity cost. If your time is being spent on mowing the lawn, cleaning house, maybe sometimes even some of the cooking chores, then it's not being spent in other areas. And so it might be that your time at home, because it's a little bit more limited, you want to spend that with your kids or your cats or your husband, your dogs, your mom, who knows, but not necessarily in there cleaning the bathroom.
Get your kids to do the chores.
That helps too.
Do you want to help mom in the business? Yeah, I do. Okay, great. Here's the list.
Then what else can you eliminate? And this one, I did put a list up. This is something you need to kind of think about yourself. What are the things that you do that you can eliminate? Now, there are things that sometimes that might be watching TV, right? Again, that's in the not important, not urgent, not important, no reason to do it, other than sometimes it's a mental break. So for some people, that's fine. It's their mental break. But sitting down every night and watching the news, I don't even know if that's a mental break. What can you eliminate? Sometimes it's people you can eliminate. And I hate to say that. I might mean that you put them all the way completely out of your life, but are there people that are time sucks? People that call on you for everything? Can you not permanently eliminate them or not, looking at that.
Are you on 15 different boards?
Oh,
Do
yeah.
you volunteer pro bono for all these different things? Not saying that you don't want to support your favorite charity or whatever, but a lot of people who are very active in entrepreneurship are also very active in other organizations. And the truth of the matter is that can pull an awful amount of your time.
Yeah. So sometimes it's also looking about where you're spending your time in sales. Are there things in sales that you're doing that are really not paying back? And should you eliminate those too?
Yeah.
So this is a very personal one when it gets into it. And the next thing we want to talk about, so we talked about the ways of kind of saving time. So what can we do to maximize
The
time? Yeah.
So creating timelines. So first of all, before we save anything, we need to know what we're spending our time on. So we need to look at basically the time we're spending in sales, the time we're spending in chasing vendors, the time we're actually spending in production, and we want to see what it is out there that we can in fact maximize that time and basically make it more efficient. Number one, and I talk about this a lot, I know, is modeling production. And people say to me, hey, you know what, Steve, I'm in a commercial kitchen on Tuesdays from 2 till 7. Why do I have to model my production? Well, you have to model it because first of all, you're going to run out of time if your business continues to grow in working in the kitchen. You want to know when that's going to happen. But you also want to model your production to basically see what the needs are going to be of your time and the time of your staff or whatever as you go forward. So part of that is basically creating, as Deborah mentioned before, systems and checklists. And systems and checklists are great because you get into a system, it doesn't mean you're going to follow it 100% of the time. Don't worry about that. It's there to basically give you the focus, to let you know what's going on, and to give you measurements. Checklists are great because humans just tend to look at things on a visual manner, and a list is different than trying to go through a sort of a reel in your mind of what's all the stuff I'm supposed to take to the kitchen today. And by creating a checklist that you have that basically, it doesn't mean you need to fill it out every time. Simply looking at it will give you a clue to go, oh, yes, I need to make sure that I take the balance and measure and weights and measures thing with me. That's very important.
So the other thing is using online tools. So especially if you're, pretty tech savvy, this is a great way to maximize your time. So there are a lot of things that you can use. Like I said, my favorite new one is Streak. And this one, it's kind of a CRM, and it will keep track. You can put something if you're supposed to contact somebody, and it puts it on your calendar. So you're not going back and thinking about these different items. There is Boomerang, which I mentioned earlier, which will bring things back into your mailbox whenever it's at a certain point. So if you haven't heard from somebody in 3 to 5 years, you know what? A lot of people use this more. We're a little behind on the texting. There's so much you can do with the Alexas and all those different things out there, Siri, where you tell them to remind you. We've gotten a little better at doing this on our iPhones of walking us like, please remind me especially if we're out somewhere. So using online tools and technology, and think of what's going to work for you when you do that. And there's a lot of lists out there, and there's so many different ones. So what's going to work for you? The next thing is finding help and outsourcing. And I'm going to do this together. And this goes back to knowing your strengths, right? So finding help doesn't have to be going out and hiring people. It can be engaging your children or your spouse or one of your best friends to help you. It can be hiring people. And again, look at the opportunity cost. So is it cost you more money to have somebody come in and help you than it would be for you spending, 20 hours doing something, where if you have someone come in, you're spending 10 and those other 10 are used on more valuable items. And then outsourcing. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but if you're going to be successful in this business, you can't do it all. And, if you go back and you look at people that are really successful in business, and I mean like the Richard Bransons, I'm not talking, they outsource a lot. They hand over to their team. So probably a little different than outsourcing. They hand over their team and let them do their job. And so if you can kind of let go of some of the things you're doing, it doesn't mean you're not doing quality control checks, you're not doing this, if you're hiring the person you think is the best, is doing quality control, have checks and balances in the place, but knowing that you're not going to be able to be in control of it all, that will keep you from growing.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's important too in terms of that finding help is also bringing in people with other skills that you may not have or may not be as well developed. Really can help you to save an amazing amount of time when it comes right down to it.
Like a marketing person?
Like a marketing person. Yes, that's one example. So strategies to maximize time continued. Time blocking. Fairly successful people also do a lot of time blocking, and this comes down to, even as Bill Gates does, is taking 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever, a year, and going off to an island with his wife and reading books. That's a little extreme, but the idea is basically, if you're going to be, let's say, going online and looking at food trends and taste trends, you do a time blocking for that, and maybe you do that every Friday from 1:30 to 2:30. And come 2:30, you're going to be hopefully doing something else. The other important thing is calendaring your planning time, which means you need to plan to plan. You need to put into your calendar blocking time off to plan. And that's what it's for. It's not for solving problems. It's not for dealing with HR. It's not for finding a better price for butter. It's planning time. You're going to spend 2 hours planning your production for the next 6 months.
I'm actually going to backtrack a little bit too on the time blocking. One of the best things you can time block is your email.
Oh, email. Yes. Oh, yeah.
Those are one of those things you think it's urgent and you think it's important because it's, or you think it's urgent, but it's not important because it's there in front of you if it's popping up, doing that. So time blocking email and time blocking phone calls that you need to make. Those two of the other really important things, that'll save you a lot of time. So kind of going back to that, not being distracted, is turning off your Wi-Fi. If you're going to sit down and do some writing, especially if you have your emails that are popping up or anything else, or you're tempted to go online. There was one guy that was a writer, and he had a computer that didn't have Wi-Fi on it. It was the only way, and he would go somewhere and write, and then he'd put it on a stick and put it on his calendar. It was the only way he wouldn't get distracted and go online. So, and this was a very successful writer. I don't remember who it was, but a very a top-notch writer. Top-notch. Yeah. Leave your phones in the other room. I was reading about this, a couple months ago, that if your phone is in the other room, because your phone, let's be real, is not your phone. I'm not talking about your phone that's on your desk, but your little, smartphone. Again, it goes back to the fact that if it's in the room, you have a tendency of picking it up. You have the tendency of answering it. You hear the text, you hear the other notifications, and it distracts you. And it takes time to go back. If you were distracted from a task you're working on, it takes time to go back and refocus. So it's not even just the time you take to look at that when you're in the middle of something. It's also then the time to go back and refocus.
It's something that I do, and if you've called me any number of times, you've probably heard that I wasn't able to pick up the phone because the phone is on the charger. And that's because that's what I do with it. I go stick it on the charger, which happens to be 2 rooms away, if I'm going to be working on something where I need concentration. And then I go back and pick it up. As a matter of fact, it's on the phone charger right now.
Yeah. Mine's right here. So just turning it over, which I do, isn't supposed to, it doesn't help. I find I've actually, during this time, I've picked it up a couple of times just out of habit. I'm not doing anything with it. And then using timers. So going back to when we're talking about time blocking, but using using timers. And it's something I've started doing more because I can go down that rabbit hole really easy. So if you use timers, it goes back to that principle, right? Is you're going to, and I don't remember what it's called, I'm sorry, but basically that that the project expands to meet the time you have. So if you have 4 hours to do something, it's going to take you 4 hours. If you have an hour to get it done because you have a deadline, lo and behold, you can get it done in an hour.
Amazing. So there's some other aspects. We know we all don't have the cash flow that allows us to go out and outsource a whole bunch of this stuff. So the basic idea is that we want to try to figure out a priority list, right?
So this is something I do more than Steve. Maybe it's because I'm a little dyslexic and I'm like, let me get someone else to do this if I can. So know what you want to have done and what you trust somebody else to do. So again, I've had people go out and research online a variety of different things for me because I know they're small tasks. They're important. They need to be done, but they're not critical. Um, Try some people out. So decide you're going to use like a Fiverr, or there's a couple other ones I think that I have on here too. The virtual assistant and different ones. So when you're doing this, start with a small task, try them out. If they seem to work, then you can hire them again for another task. I knew one person that was doing some production stuff or some programming stuff, and he hired people on an outsourcing site, and he took 4 different pieces and hired 4 different people to do those pieces to see which one he liked. He ended up using all 4 of the pieces, but the person he used then to pull them all together and finish up the rest of the project was the one that did the best job on that small project he did. Also get recommendations. You know what? Think about, like, if a lot of you are in commercial kitchens, talk to other people that are in your commercial kitchens and see what it is that they think, people that they've worked with. You know, don't just kind of go out there and do it on your own. Ask them. You know, we have an abundance of resources usually around us by the people that we work with, that work in our commercial kitchens, that are at farmers markets with us, that are here or there or different events. Start using them as a resource. And don't forget to look at reviews. So if you go onto some of these different places, yes, yeah, they have the reviews of people. Look at them, use them, and then consider the size of the job that you want to have done. And sometimes this is like, it's going to be a big job. You might want to start with a person with a small one to see how they do. But if there's a job that's going to take a ton of your time, isn't it easier to give it, or better to give it to someone else instead of you, again, sitting somewhere and concentrating, and you're not going out there and talking to your customers or to other people. So you want to be talking to your customers and your consumers. That's where you want to spend your time exploring and experimenting with different items that you have in your kitchen, not necessarily doing some big, long project like, you know, a website.
Yeah, it just depends on, again, where you are with the project, and also where you are. Everybody's on a budget. It just depends on, you know, the size of the budget, as it were. One of the things you can do too is also share resources with others. Many times there's people who can work as sales reps, and they'll actually rep for 3 or 4 different firms. You can look with people who are doing a social media outreach. And again, you know, maybe you've seen some wonderful stuff coming from someone else that you know that's in the food or CPG biz around town, and you find out that that person, in fact, can do some stuff, and you can share that resource. They don't have to be tied to that one company. Students and interns. So, you know, quite often, you know, if you have a university, colleges nearby, they have marketing programs. Some of them even have entrepreneurship programs, and you can get a student as an intern. You may have to pay them. So some places require a stipend, but in some they just work actually for credit. You have to define what they're going to do, and it actually can work out really well.
And actually, I was just talking to someone today that has an intern that's starting with them to do kind of be a virtual assistant. So, yeah. Call on family and friends, and I say this with a caveat. Yeah. So one of the things you want to remember, so you have the friend out there, and when I was teaching entrepreneurship at Renaissance, this happened a lot. It's like, oh, I have a friend that does websites. And 5 months later, their website's still not done because it's not the number one priority for that person. So when you're asking a favor from somebody, remember it's a favor. And so it's a lot of times the last thing on their list that they want to have done. And that's not always. You might have somebody that's great and you know that. But when you're looking at certain things and you have a friend or family member that can do it for you, they do it professionally, think about establishing it as a professional relationship with them, with timelines and guidelines, because it's going to keep everything on track instead of just kind of waiting there. And I saw this so many different times, I can't tell you, and they come back in and it's like, you know, they haven't started it, or they just don't put the time and effort. And part of it is they don't have the time and it's not their passion.
Yeah, and if you have an old Uncle Joe, and Uncle Joe was a copier salesman back in the 80s, probably not going to have a whole lot of relevancy to what you're doing now.
Oh yeah, we've seen that before too. Yeah. So use online resources, and these are some of them. I knew they were coming up, and I couldn't think of them off the top of my head. Fiverr, I use Fiverr quite a bit. Thumbtack, that's usually a little more local if you're trying to do things. I think that's how we got our headshots done, was on Thumbtack. Upwork, again, is our virtual assistant. Virtual assistant, I love that name. And then Fancy Hands. Right. And some of these you can do. So a lot of these have programs where you can have like 5 hours a month for 25 or a certain amount of money. I don't remember how much it is, honestly, or 5 tasks and 25 a month. So you want to look at them, but it's a good way of not spending a lot of money, but taking some of those tasks off your hands. And some are more expensive than others. I think Upwork was the one that was the most.
I've had a client who's had a lot of success on it. She's had with Upwork,
right,
getting virtual
assistance,
help in different cities,
right,
and working with people.
Yeah, excellent. So today we've talked a lot about ways of saving time, and we're going back to looking at it. How does that work with the sales versus production crunch? Well, in reality, the sales and production crunch, what really happens there, it's a matter of time. You're working on sales, you get orders in, and you have to get the production done. So how do you do that? You try to do it by saving some time.
And if you're lucky, this is a problem that happens sooner rather than later, and actually happens several times during the course of the growth of your business. So you have to be, first of all, able to maximize as much of your own time effort as you can, and then seriously begin looking at outsourcing responsibilities and jobs, whether that's production, whether that's bookkeeping, whether it's going on Upwork and finding people to be personal assistants, whatever it is you need. Eventually, you are not going to be able to do it all yourself, or even probably within your family and friends network.
So that's why we bring this up at this point, because at some point this is going to happen, and thinking of different strategies to maximize your time.
And sooner probably rather than later.
So if you have any questions, please feel free to email us. You can reach me at deb@kitchen2shelf.com.
And you can also reach me at steve@kitchen2shelf.com as well. I have 3 emails now.
Yeah, you can reach him at nextlevel with 2x's.com, nextlevelmarketing 2x's.com too. So thank you and have a great day.